Yes, monetary policy, how the central bank influences the economy through the money supply. Remember, it's the central bank of every nation that prints the money, right? So the central bank has got three tools it uses for the monetary policy, right? The first tool is the required reserve ratio, right? This is the percentage of money the banks should keep whenever someone deposits money in them. All right. So if the central bank wants to increase the money supply, it is going to decrease this required reserve ratio. All right. Decreases the required reserve ratio. All right. This means banks have to hold little of your money, and the rest of the money they can loan it out. All right. So decreasing the required reserve ratio, that's to increase the money supply. Right? If the central bank wants to reduce the money supply, they will increase this required reserve ratio, meaning the percentage of money that the bank need to keep whenever you deposit is going to be higher than the amount of money they can loan out. Are we okay with these first two, colleagues? For monetary policy, the required reserve ratio, percentage of money that the bank is supposed to keep you whenever you deposit money in there. Are we okay with this, colleagues? Any questions? Remember, we're moving slow so that everyone grasps this topic. Any questions on the required reserve ratio? Okay, the second tool is the discount rate. This is the interest rate the central bank charges the commercial banks. All right. Remember, the central bank is the bank for the commercial banks. Right? So commercial banks usually borrow money from the central bank, especially, for example, when these excess reserves, right, in the central bank, in a commercial bank, whenever the excess reserves reach zero, right, and banks don't want to touch this money for loans, all right, they go to the lender of the last resort, which is the central bank. Okay, so if the central bank decreases the discount rate, it means the cost of borrowing for commercial banks gets lower, meaning commercial banks can borrow more money, all right? And when commercial banks borrow money, they obviously want to loan out more money because remember, that's how fractional reserve banking happens, where whenever you deposit money into the bank will keep a certain amount and loan out the other amount. All right. So if the central bank lowers the discount rate, it means commercial banks can borrow more. The commercial banks borrow more, they can loan out more. All right. And businesses and people will borrow more, that will increase the money supply. If the central bank increases the discount rate, meaning the cost of borrowing for commercial banks is high, it means commercial banks are going to borrow less. The less money these commercial banks have, the less money they can loan out, meaning there will be a decrease in their money supply. Are we okay with this second tool of monetary policy? I think it's best I go name by name because I want to make sure we can start. Madam Chilufya, are we okay with that? The tools, or those two tools of monetary policy? If you have a question, you can ask a question. Are we okay with that? And also Mr. Chiza, Mr. Mulenga, the two Mulengas here, Mr. Mulenga Chinungu and Mr. Mutabe Mulenga, Mr. Kwema, Mr. Ernest, Mr. Mulenga, and the four others. Are we okay with these two tools that we have looked at before we go to the third tool for monetary policy? Does anyone work in the central bank here? Okay, we'll assume silence means we are okay. Here, we can assume that silence means we are okay. All right. Then the third tool for monetary policy is open market operations. All right. The central bank and commercial banks deal in treasury bills. Treasury bills are just short term government loans. All right. These are risk free. All right. They are risk free. So the open market operations includes the selling and purchasing of these treasury bills. All right, selling and purchasing of the treasury bills. If the central bank purchases treasury bills, it's purchasing these treasury bills from the commercial bank, all right, and in return, it's giving the commercial bank money, all right. So if the central bank purchases treasury bills, money is going into the commercial banks. These commercial banks can loan out the money, increasing the money supply. All right. As if the central bank purchases the treasury bills. All right. From the commercial banks. Now, if the central bank sells these treasury bills, all right, meaning the commercial banks get the treasury bills, the central bank gets the money, it means the money is coming out of circulation. That means there will be a reduction in the money supply. Any questions? So let's look at the tier accounts for commercial banks and the central bank. Right. We're going to make a scenario where the central bank purchases the treasury bills, right? Which means money is flowing into the commercial banks. All right. I also want to just introduce this graph, which is also going to help us illustrate monetary policy, the money markets graph. All right. On the y-axis, we have the interest rate. On the x-axis, we have the quantity of money. All right. Then we have the money demand curve, inverse relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money. Just remember, at high interest rates, the cost of borrowing is high, so people borrow less, thus the quantity of money is low. Okay, that's at high interest rates. All right. At lower interest rates means the cost of borrowing has reduced, means you can borrow more. The more you borrow, the quantity of money increases. As for the money demand, then we have the money supply curve, which is upward sloping. It is not affected by the interest rates. All right. It's the central bank that prints this money. Okay. It prints the money and it can increase the money supply or decrease the money supply. So you have an upward sloping curve like that. Okay. I hope we're okay with this graph for the money markets. All right, so let's look at uh, just like fiscal policy, there's also expansionary monetary policy and contractionary monetary policy. All right, so for expansionary monetary policy, this is where the central bank wants to increase the money supply. Right, so let's say, for example, the central bank wants to increase the money supply, it purchases treasury bills worth 10,000 from this commercial bank, right? This central bank purchases treasury bills worth 10,000 from this commercial bank. We'll call this U Bank. From U Bank, so we're going to see what happens, all right, to the money supply. So purchases worth 10,000 from U Bank. So let's look at the central bank's balance sheet. Actually, colleagues, these are balance sheets. They're just represented as T accounts, but they're actually balance sheets. All right. I don't know why in macro they're calling them T accounts, but in actuality, these are their balance sheets. All right. So if the central bank purchases worth 10,000 worth of treasury bills, all right, the asset side increases by 10,000. All right. Assets for the central bank are these treasury bills, which they can buy and sell. All right. Then the liabilities for the central bank are the reserves and the money in circulation. All right. Remember, on your notes of money, there's that note which says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. All right. So when the central bank is printing this money, that money is being owed to you, the citizens. All right. So the reserves, which is also called the monetary base, this is the money which the commercial banks bank in the central bank, and it also includes the currency in circulation, the M1 money supply. So it's also going to increase by 10,000. All right. This is a balance sheet. That's why when one side increases, the other side has to increase. Okay. If it was a T account, it would be different. All right. So the assets for the central bank increase, at the same time the liabilities also increase, because this is new money which is being owed to the people. All right. On our graph here, this will be represented by a shift to the right. All right. A shift to the right. Okay. So what happens is when the money supply increases, all right, it means some banks have more money. The more money the banks have, the less the interest rates that they're going to charge you. All right. If you have 100 kwacha and someone comes to borrow it, and that's your only 100 kwacha, the interest rate you charge them will be very high. You always charge them 100% interest rate. But if you have a 1 million and someone comes to borrow 100 kwacha, you might even give them 100 kwacha for free. All right. Same with the banks. So the interest rate has reduced, meaning for firms and us, the citizens of the nation, we can borrow more. So now let's look at the balance sheet for EU Bank. All right. Let me just redraw it here. So this EU Bank has just received 10,000 from the central bank. All right. Let's see what happens first to the required reserves. All right. And also this 10,000 which has come, this bank, it can like put part of the money in excess reserves, can also put part of the money in loans. All right. If it wants, can put all that money in the excess reserves, or if it wants, can put all that money in the loans. So with this illustration, since this bank has got money from the central bank, the other part of the money we're going to put it on the loan section so that the Bank can offer out more loans. All right. Just remember excess reserves. This is what is used to cover withdrawals. Whenever someone comes to withdraw, it's removed from the excess reserves. The banks don't want to touch their money for their loans. Okay. So this 10,000 has come. The let's say the required reserve ratio here is 10%. All right. So from this 10,000, all right, we'll say 10% goes to the, we'll stay with the required reserves. So we'll say 10% of 10,000, that is 1,000, right? Then the remaining 90%, all right, as I said, this remaining 90% can be split between excess reserves and loans, or they can be put on excess reserves or loans alone. But with this example, we're going to increase the money for the loans. So first, the required reserves, they're originally 2,000. With this 10,000, going to 1,000 is going to go to the required reserve. So say 2,000 plus 1,000. The required reserves are 3,000. All right. So here in this example, excess reserves, we'll just leave them at 8,000. Okay. Excess reserves, 8,000. So that the remaining 9,000, all right, we're going to put it to their loans. All right. So 9,000 plus 10,000, loan amount 19,000. All right. So now this bank can offer out new loans because that's primarily how the bank makes its money, from interest it gets from loans. All right. Then on our demand deposit sides, remember this is the money which people have in the bank, and also it's also part of the M1 money supply. So this 20,000, we're just going to add 10,000, and it's going to be 30,000 here. And deposit. So 3,000 plus 8,000 plus 19,000. 3,000 plus 8,000, 11,000. 11,000 plus 19,000, 30,000 on the asset side of the bank and 30,000 on the liability side of the commercial bank. So more money is being loaned out. So we say businesses and firms and businesses and also people in general are borrowing more in the economy. So let's now translate all of this to the aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. All right. So usually this okay. More money is being put into circulation since the central bank has purchased treasury bills, pumping in more money to commercial banks, meaning commercial banks can now loan out more money. So the M1 money supplies has increased. Mhm. Obviously, if you see a reduction, especially in the commercial bank, in reserve, the required reserve, the demand deposits, and the loans, obviously, there you take it as the central bank sold the treasury bills, meaning it's taking out money out of circulation. Then, if you see an increase, then the central bank has purchased treasury bills, meaning it's increased the money in circulation. Yes, but first, let me finish this illustration before we go that side. Because you cause confusion amongst people here. They're going with the flow here. We'll go to that exercise there. All right. So, as I said, business, since the bank has more money, interest rates are low, meaning businesses and consumers are borrowing more. So, now I'm saying we're going to translate this into the aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. So what I was about to say is the central bank usually employs this expansionary monetary policy when the economy is going down. All right. When you go on those graphs for the GDP for a country like this, and you see the economy is going downwards like this. All right. And this is where the central bank will employ the expansionary monetary policy so to kickstart the economy with spending because it's spending what that drives the economy. All right. So when we go back to our aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve, we have price level here on our y-axis, price level of all goods and services within the country, and have real GDP output on our x-axis. I hope we all remember what real GDP is. I'm praying we remember that. We have our downward sloping aggregate demand curve. Aggregate demand, total demand for goods and services produced within the nation, or you can think of it as total expenditure of goods and services produced within the nation. At high price levels, less expenditure. At low price levels, higher expenditure. Short run aggregate supply. Short run in macroeconomics, this is when wages are fixed. Usually, wages are fixed due to your contracts. All right. So when price levels rise, you can't just go to your employer and tell him to increase your salary. That won't be possible. All right. Short run aggregate supply. When price level of goods rise, as producers, you want to produce more because that means more profits, especially if you've got fixed wages. You can just keep on increasing your profits by selling more. All right. Then we have our long run aggregate supply. This represents our real GDP output at full employment. Full employment of labor, land, and capital, but especially labor. All right. And when we talk about full employment, we also talk about this is when the economy has the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment, this is when there's only frictional and structural unemployment within a nation. That's usually between 4 to 6%, somewhere there. All right. This is the long run aggregate supply. So we're going to show an economy which is undergoing a recession. All right. Here's our aggregate demand curve. If you remember the shifters of aggregate demand, consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, and spending by foreigners, net exports. I'll just put it as NX here. So since interest rates are low, you can borrow more, meaning spending now increases. So we would say spending by consumers and businesses will increase due to these low interest rates through this decrease in the money supply. Then our aggregate demand curve will shift, bringing us back at full employment.